Hey, what's up everybody? Eric with SOLOBOX. Today I'm out in the shop doing a little work on my KLR. I think I'll show you today how to add this power outlet to your dashboard. If you don't have a set of the risers in the dashboard from me yet, give me a shout. This really makes a big difference in terms of having good wind protection and having the outlet to be able to charge your cell phone while you're riding, or maybe you've got a Bluetooth unit for your helmet or whatever. It's really handy to be able to have stuff charging while you're riding. It's really nice. So anyway, stay tuned and I will show you really quick how to go about doing that. All right, so for disassembly, I'm going to assume that most of you know how to take your tank off of your bike, but I'll go ahead and run through this really quick for the people that may not know how to do it. So two side panels, there's a bolt at the front, or excuse me, at the back and one at the front on both sides. Remove both side panels. That'll give you access to the seat bolts, which are about here. There's one on each side. Take those out. The seat slides back, lifts up and off. You'll find two bolts for the fuel tank right underneath of the seat. You'll also find a vent line for the gas tank. You can pull that off with pliers. Take out the two 10mm bolts. Then here on the shroud, you've got a bolt, one on each side. Down at the bottom, there's little rubber push-in pieces. They just pop out. So you just pop those out. And then around this side, down at your petcock, you've got a fuel line here, and then there's also, it can be hard to see, but there's a little vent line that's up in there too. And so longer needle nose pliers are really handy for getting that off. So anyway, it's super easy. Once you've taken all that stuff off, this, the fuel tank just basically slides back up and off, and reassembly of everything is basically just in the opposite order. So do that and then get back with me. All right, let's talk a little bit about how to lay out exactly where we want the hole to go for our outlet. So I get these at the metal supply store. You can mark this with anything that, you know, it's not going to show up regardless of what you use. This powder coating is just really tough to make a mark on it. But basically, how I usually try to choose my spot is I'll just take a ruler and go like up to this corner up here and down to this corner here. Scribe myself a little line, do the same thing in the opposite direction. That locates me a nice centered spot where I can know to drill my hole. And I've done a whole bunch of these that way. I think for my personal bike this time, I'm gonna try doing something different, which is to try to move the plug over to the side, which leaves me a nice wide open spot where maybe I'll put a RAM mount and my phone or something later on. So I'm gonna offset one, mostly just because I've never tried doing it. One thing to keep in mind is that the front of the bike does taper. So if you get way too over towards the side over here, you could run into some clearance issues. You can also run into clearance issues at the very bottom because this sits behind the stock gauge cluster. Just a small amount of this is actually covered. So keep that in mind. Just maybe dry fit everything and look at everything real close before you drill the hole, because once the hole's there, it's really tough to take it back out. All right, so I've got my layout done. Here's where I want to go ahead and drill this. I've got my drill set up with my 7/8" hole saw. One thing you want to remember, and this is very important, is that you want to drill this hole from the back, not from the face. The reason being is that although the plug does have a bit of a reveal which can hide any scuffing or anything that happens, most of the scuffing, if anything's going to occur, will happen on the side that you start the hole on and not the side that you finish it on. And so we're going to start on the back and drill all the way down and through. I like to leave it hanging out off of the bench a little bit to do this. Now normally actually I would do this in the drill press. I'm choosing to do it with a hand drill this time, mostly because I want to do this with something that everybody basically has available to them. So I'll get my pilot hole actually going right here on the bench. You might want to drill over something that you don't really care about, but I'll get it started and then I'll let it hang out over like this to try to finish up the hole. Let's see how it goes. All right, Got my pilot hole done. Kind of walking it around a little bit. Definitely want to be careful doing this too. These little teeth are real sharp. All right, so we went all the way through. It's a little bit jagged around here. I might take a file and just clean this up just a little bit, but that looks really good, so certainly usable. You can see where this has been sitting behind the dash. This one's already been on my bike. So anyway, this part's hidden once it's reinstalled. All right. All right, so here's the materials I'm going to use. I think this is, what is it, 14 gauge wire. Probably need about 3 feet of the black, about 6 feet of the red. Here's the outlet that I'm using, but I also, while I was going through my electrical drawer, realized that I do have one of the flat cap types. These are readily available. This is actually a really nice one. So there's a few different ones, but use whatever you come across. It's fine. I've got shrink tubing. I've got flux, solder, electric soldering iron. But I'm actually going to show you how to do this with a gas-powered one because it heats up so much faster. This is a small blade fuse holder. Some small blade fuses. This is for the shrink wrap, just to heat it up and melt it down. And some zip ties for tidying everything up at the end. And wire strippers. So I guess I'm going to prepare to do a solder joint for you, and I'll be back in a moment. All right, let's see if I can't make a decent solder joint for you guys. So this shrink wrap, this 1/8 stuff ended up being a little bit small, but I've got some other stuff. I don't know what this is, like maybe 1/4 inch. And it's probably a little bit big, but I still think it'll work better. I was having a hard time getting this stuff to slide on the wire up over the joint, so I'm going to do this again. Make sure you slide this onto the wire before you get started, because sometimes you can kind of paint yourself into a corner, so to speak. You won't be able to put it on afterwards. So take a little bit of the flux probably on both pieces. I like to slide the wires onto one another, kind of like this, into a jumbled mass, and then just kind of crimp it down a little bit with your fingers. I'll take my iron, tin it a little bit with a little bit of the solder, and then let's make sure I'm in frame here. Then I'll usually just kind of push down on the wire and feed some of it in. Let it all heat up until it all gets completely nice and wet, and then pull off. Let it cool down. And there we go. We can slide the shrink wrap up over the top of the joint. Take our lighter. Melt this down. It's nicely protected. It's a lot nicer than using just electrical tape. I mean, you could go that way, but I like using this stuff. It's just more protected in the long run, I think. So anyway, that's not going anywhere. That's a nice joint. And so basically this end of this is going to go right onto the battery. This is going to go up. I've got another joint I've got to do that's going to be basically at the back here. The kit comes with little plugs. And so here's the one for the positive. This is going to slip right onto the positive terminal, which by the way is the center one on this. Do not be confused. The outside one is the negative. So I've got to do another joint here at the other end of my wire. And then I've got to do one more for the negative, which will be here and then plug on. And so I'll go ahead and do that stuff and then come back to you guys. All right, so I've got the riser and the dash back on the bike. I'll show you how I routed everything. We'll start at the back by the battery here. I want to show you how I hook the wire up. When you loosen this screw, there's a little plate there, and I just slip the wire underneath of it and then cinch it down. It makes for a really nice connection, super easy to do. Come up into our fuse. I put a 5 amp little fuse in there, which is probably overkill, probably could have been down around 2 or something. Then we run along here. I left the zip ties along so you can see exactly where I put them. Just trying to keep the wire tucked up close to the frame. As we move our way up further forward, you can see where the negative wire is. I cut this to length, loosened up the 10mm bolt. I stripped this probably to about 1 inch back, bent it into a U, put it underneath of the bolt, tightened it down. It continues up, goes between the fork and the frame. Comes out back here, comes across. This is the first time I've run one over towards the side. I've always drilled them to be towards the center. You can see this is actually kind of close. It actually looks like there won't be clearance, but I've checked it. The windscreen does fit on there in this position, so it's just fine. So anyway, that's where I'm at now. And I think what I'm going to do next is put the windscreen back on and button up the rest of the bike. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that I have this wired so that it's not keyed. I have actually wired them so that they are keyed in the past, and how I did that is I wired it so that when you turn the key on and the headlight comes on, I got my positive for this from the wire that goes to the headlight here. And you can do it that way. But and kind of, I guess the benefit to doing it that way is that when you shut the bike off, whatever it is that's hooked up to this turns off also, so you don't run the risk of draining your battery. But what I found was that when I would be in camp, I really wanted to continue to charge things like the battery on my cell phone when the bike was off, and I couldn't do that without turning the key on and leaving everything on. And so I've got this wired so that it's direct. So it's anytime you plug something into this, you're going to get power to it. So you can go either way with it. What I found for myself personally is I would rather have it hot all the time and just know that, like, when I arrive someplace, like if I'm going to leave the bike overnight, unplug whatever's in there so you don't come out to a dead battery. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and button this back up and then I'll get back with you guys. All right, so thanks for tuning in today and checking this out. This was a fun little project. Like I said, if you don't have a set of the windscreen risers, hit me up for a set. And, going out in the shop one afternoon and putting this together, it makes your bike that much nicer to have a power source right there on it. And it's really a fun little project to do, So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and Eric with SOLOBOX. Ride safe, everybody.